Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. I'm joined today by a Harris namesake, Stephen Harris, who's the founder of Integrity HSE. And Stephen, as well as being a great safety professional, is also really passionate about the topic of leadership. Indeed, he wrote a book about that, as we will speak about. And we really get into what things HSE professionals need to do to be more effective leaders nowadays. Lots of great topics to explore, lots of things for you to go away, think about, cogitate on, and do. I'd really encourage you to take some notes from this conversation and go away and do some of the things that we speak about. And I'm sure you'll get a huge amount of value from it. As always, hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, please give us a like, a comment, a share on social media. Please do subscribe on your podcasting platform of choice, and a review on there would be very much appreciated as well. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Thanks for joining me today, Stephen.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure, Christian.
This is long overdue, and I'll tell you why. I'm bearing a grudge against you, because the first thing I'm going to ask you is, how did it feel to win the SHP Most Influential Health and Safety Professional in 2023? And I bear a grudge because I was one of the people you beat.
Well, so there's an old phrase that says, you're standing on the shoulder of giants. And I really was standing on the shoulders of giants. Some of the people that were up there as finalists were just incredible, dedicated professionals that add so much value to the world that it's just not worth talking about. So it's one of those moments when I was nominated, and I know who I was nominated by, and it was somebody that was on my team. And as much as initially I said to him, "What on earth were you doing? That's not a place where I belong." And he convinced me that it was. But when I actually won, it was a bit of a surreal feeling, actually. It really was. And one of the most incredible things about it was that it was dedicated, that year's award was dedicated to Mavis, who'd passed away on the November beforehand, who was just the most incredible HSE professional and dedicated her life to talking about asbestos that ultimately she passed away from, which I used the opportunity of being labelled as the most influential person in 2023, in 2024, to talk about Mavis and to carry on her fight, because I thought that was only right and proper. But her story, for those that don't know, which is an incredibly powerful story, was that it wasn't actually Mavis that was working with the asbestos, it was her husband. And as she took his coveralls home, she'd washed the coveralls when he got back in. And the story goes that she would shake them out in the back of the house, and that's where she ingested the asbestos, for want of a better expression. But incredible lady. And when her life did end, which is tragic, she went down swinging and never stopped campaigning until the very end. So to win that award, incredible, mind-blowing. To win the award that was dedicated to Mavis that we just lost, selfishly, was the cherry on the cake. It was incredible. But I still, there were people on that final awards list who arguably were more deserved winners than me. I don't think there was to say someone took home the award. Yes, they did, but everybody in that final list was great, including yourself, Christian.
Yeah, something like that. But we try the best that we can do, which is all we can do, isn't it? But it's every year. The shortlist is always incredible, and it just goes to show the great work that is being done. And that's one of the reasons I do this podcast, is to try and highlight some people that are doing some great stuff, because sometimes I feel like safety kind of sort of it has a kind of negative connotation to a lot of people, and I think sometimes we focus a bit too much on things going wrong rather than the positive side of things. So it's kind of good to talk about those positive things and the people that are making a difference.
I couldn't agree more. There's such a broad brush perspective put on safety. And generally, when I speak to clients and we mention things like safety, they immediately think, oh, this person's going to, give me a go slow. There's going to be more procedures. There's going to be more clipboards. There's going to be more checking. And then I sit them down and explain to them that safety, when it's done properly, is about preventing unplanned events. And actually, it'll turn you into a more effective, more efficient business. And as soon as they see that, especially with the likes of, you can bring a business case to the table of, for every £1 of direct cost that is insurable in terms of health and safety, there is about 8 to 32 times as much uninsured costs. And then you take their incidents from last year, and maybe they, bashed the forklift truck in the factory and it cost them 10,000. It cost them 10,000 on their P&L sheet, but what it actually cost their business was so much more than that. And then the light bulb starts to go, okay, so you're here to solve my problems and not create more of them. Yeah, it's more than just, complying with legislation, which should only ever be a minimum thing that you should do. It's about maximizing your business, facilitating your strategy, and making you the best you can be.
Mm-hmm. And amazingly, we've done a great segue into the first thing that I was going to talk to you about, which is kind of the evolving role of the HSE professional. We shared a few notes in advance, and you said, "Oh, here's a few topics," and that was one of them. And we've managed to get straight into it. So it must be a Harris wavelength thing that we're on that nobody else will appreciate.
Yeah.
So we're talking about that shift, I suppose, from kind of a compliance enforcement role into more what you've described as being a strategic leader. How well are we doing in general terms at that? How far have we travelled, and how far have we still to go?
To be perfectly honest, I think we're doing incredibly badly. I think we're failing our next generation of professionals that come up. I think that there is an awful lot of mission creep within the profession. And to be perfectly frank with you, I think there's an awful lot of incompetence in the profession as well. And that can be two types of incompetence. It can be unconscious incompetence and conscious incompetence. And I'm sad to say there's an awful lot of conscious incompetence, which isn't then being matched with a competency development program that fits that HSE professional's role. And I think one of the absolute perfect examples of that is the industries want to tackle mental health, which is an incredible thing. They say in the UK, it's the biggest killer of males under 45. And it's not that after 45 people stop killing themselves. It's that after 45, things like cancers and heart attacks and things become more prevalent. But what you have is the mental health remit often drip down into an HSE professional or an HSE advisor's, scope. But there's no developmental training there. There's no, just all of a sudden, it's exactly the same with the likes of behavioral-based safety, which is, it is a scientifically valid, wonderful way to manage risk within your workplace. But it's relatively complex with the interplaying parts of what you need before the human and after the human. So we're not necessarily looking to change the human. We're changing what's before and after, and then the human will nudge the change itself. But it's something that HSE professionals read on a LinkedIn post or read in a textbook and then try to adopt in the workplace. And ultimately, their guinea pigs are the same people that can get hurt and go home with some pretty tragic injuries. So what do I think about the evolving profession just now? I look at institutions like IOSH and I have a look at their competency development program, and it's very, very broad brush. So it is fit for purpose for a segment of the industry at a certain level, but I struggle with more nuanced and more niche pieces, especially when our SLTs are saying, Christian, right. So security's just fallen into your remit. Now you're a security professional. I know you've never done it before, but now you'll do it. And well-being as well. So that's now with you. And let's talk about
environment.
Safety too. And let's talk about things, just let's go for it. And if you're not a qualified psychologist, by George, you should be, because that's, it's, and I tend to find as well, I'm on my soapbox a little bit here, so please stop me. But I think there's been a little bit of mission creep about HSE as well. I don't think many organizations are actually having a look and doing a real good hazard identification, risk analysis process of their business and seeing what they need to be managing in order to achieve their strategy. I think there's too many good ideas based on subjective judgment and not enough empirical evidence. So, yeah, the evolving, it's a tricky one. But what I would advise, and what I always advise for both for myself and for anyone else in the industry, but especially for those that are earlier in their career, is find an older, grey, bald person that can be a mentor for you, that you can, or 2 or 3 mentors that you can get those little bits of quality information out of. You should never be a carbon copy of someone, and that mentor should never try and make you into a little version of themselves. The mentor's job is to release your potential and let you be the best you can be. But taking little pieces from those mentors and using them to develop yourself, arguably in line with something like the IOSH Competency Development Program, that would be certainly what I'd be advising, where I do advise people to go.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think the word I used was leader, in terms of, can we be more of a strategic leader? And that ability to, push back in that scenario that you've outlined is leadership, isn't it? Rather than, yes, I'll take this on, I'll take that on, I'll take the other thing on, and then stretch yourself too thin. Actually, no, push back. Saying no is a really powerful thing to be able to do, a difficult thing to be able to do. I'm guilty of, I say yes too readily, and take too much on sometimes, as I'm sure many other people do as well. But actually, being able to sort of say, no, this isn't aligned to where I want to go. It's not aligned to where we want to go. It's not the best way of doing it. Let's come up with another plan. And having the strength and the foresight to do that, I think, is got to be a key thing that we need to be teaching people.
I think so as well. And, the evidence would tend to agree with us. The Chartered Management Institute came out with the figure that 82% of managers that we currently have in industry in the UK have no training to be managers. So, and exactly the same goes into leadership, and which are 2 different disciplines, management and leadership, but they are intertwined. I would say the percentage is far greater in leadership of people that have no leadership training. But we do a lot of leadership training here, and we base it on the 3 pillars of authenticity, credibility, and consistency. And we underpin that with the courage to follow what is right, and the ability and the skill to say no is huge. And with certain personality types, and this is another thing that people assume, me saying no and somebody else saying no, well, it's the exact same amount of effort that goes into it. No, it's not. So I have a personality type that says saying no is really quite easy for me, and I don't necessarily dwell in it. And subsequently, I'm not so much of a people person. I'm not the guy that walks into the room and everybody immediately likes. I'm the guy that walks into the room, listens to everyone, makes an opinion, and I'm buzzing away in my head, but outwardly I'm perhaps a little bit quiet. I'm not an extrovert, I'm an introvert. But I totally appreciate saying no to for some people is a really, really difficult thing to do. And that's where the mentor comes in. And, you can't get that on an IOSH development course. That's when sitting next to the old grey bald person that says it's okay to say no. I mean, one of the quotes I often fall back on is, as Hallmark card as it is a quote from Winston Churchill, who said that it was anyone without any enemies means you've never stood for anything. Now, I'm not saying create enemies, but you need to stand for things. And so saying no is important.
Yeah, I'm much better at that in a work capacity than I am in a personal capacity. But we won't turn this into a therapy session for me, because we'll be here all year if we do that. Uh, but yeah, no, I definitely agree. It's something that and I think we need to be mindful of, because I think we're pretty good at the technical stuff, albeit I do agree we stretch ourselves too thinly often. I don't know if you think about this, but I often say that a HC professional should be a bit more like a GP. So they should be able to diagnose a whole breadth of things, but they shouldn't necessarily be able to solve every single problem. And I think sometimes where we get into trouble is where we feel like we've got quite a broad knowledge of diagnostic, but actually, can we necessarily solve those problems in enough depth in every single area? I don't think you can. It can't be a specialist and an expert at everything.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that's why one of the relationships that often suffer with HSE professionals is the relationship that we have with operations teams. And they should actually be the strongest relationships that we have, but they're quite often the weakest relationship. And I tend to find that whenever we bring on a new client, or we're placing somebody within a business, or we're JVing with somebody to deliver a project, sitting down with those operations people, agreeing what good looks like, agreeing the mission and the vision, and then them telling us how they want to do it, and us then advising how they can do it within a tolerable risk spectrum, is really, really interesting. But also, what is absolutely key to those conversations throughout everything, from organizations to projects to everything, is consistent communication and no elephants left in the room. People bounce the term around psychological safety just now, and it's very fashionable and everything. But I remember Judith Hackett said that we don't invent new ways to hurt people. We just do the same thing again and again. We just don't seem to learn. The ex-head of the health and safety executive. And in terms of psychological safety, we've seen it in every high-performing team, from sports to military, where people have the freedom and the support to be able to talk about what they need to talk about, but it being listened to in a non-judgmental sense, but also not taking it to heart when someone turns around and says, no, that's stupid, and here's why. Knitting it together in a team way. So a lot of work goes into building project cultures with this organization, for sure.
And the sort of age-old, speaking about operations, the age-old challenges: safety on the one hand, productivity on the other. What are some of the strategies that you've seen that work around reframing that kind of conversation?
So I often talk about a term called technical limit. And technical limit is something that operations personnel understand, because it is something that they try to achieve themselves. And what technical limit means is that it's almost like the triple constraint of project management, where you see time, cost, and quality, and you can have two, but you can never have three, type of thing. In the same type of thing, the people, plant, and process. And it's about moving them up to their ultimate performance without it then going into an area of unacceptable risk, which will turn into an unplanned event. And whether that unplanned event then turns into someone cutting their finger or downtime, quite often that's just serendipitous. It's just luck. So what we do with clients, especially the larger firms, the likes of the manufacturing firms, the energy firms and things, we reframe safety and we talk about operational limits. We talk about technical limit, where we are going to help you take everything to its optimum performance standard, but not so much that it drops off the other end of the bell curve and starts to get into dangerous territory. And they understand that and they like it.
Yeah. Especially if you can, as you've just done, bring the analogy of downtime, a machine breaks. Doesn't have to be a finger breaking or an arm breaking. It could be a machine breaking, couldn't it? But it's the same kind of idea. You really want everything to be humming along at the best performance it can be, as you say, within that tolerance. And I think, yeah, if you bring that talk in their terms, make it understandable to them, I think you've probably got much more chance of winning their hearts and minds.
100%. I mean, if you were to show either one of us the technical efficiency reports of an organization and said, what do you think the HSE figures show? We'd be able to kind about estimate around and about right. And it would be exactly the same with the HSE figures. Here's the HSE figures for an organization. Now, I don't like things like TRIR and LTIR because they're not contextually dependent upon anything at all. You can have two factories doing completely different things, but they measure the same TRIR. It's one standard normal operation, one very extreme operation. The one with the higher figure, the one with a higher TRIR could actually be performing an awful lot better than the other one. So I don't necessarily like the figures to be used, but you could show both of us a TRIR figure and we'd be able to estimate relatively accurately the wastage, the quality, downtime, and the HSE events. And once the operations people understand that, again, it's about working against that unplanned event, because that's either going to break your machine or break your personnel or break your process or break your whatever, then they get it and they realize, okay, so we're working towards the same thing. All right,
Yeah.
Brilliant. But then comes the really interesting thing of building credibility, because what tends to happen is the next question will be, so you must have a history on the tools. No. Well, who are you to make this comment to me? Well, here's who I am. And here's all my successful projects and everything. So that's another thing that the HSE professional really needs to work on, is their what they call the credibility bank, why people should listen to them in the first place. And it's terrible to go into a room unarmed, not thinking about the credibility bank, and then being called out by someone just like me, who understandably just wants us to achieve our objectives, saying words to the effect of, I love the fact you're in this room, but tell me why I should listen to you. And then the bomb blast, rabbit in the headlights look, which is so difficult to repair.
Yeah. It's always worth having I mean, you and I both run a business, so we probably do this in without even thinking about it, but having almost like a 30-second pitch, an elevator pitch almost of like, this is who I am, this is what I've done, with a few, not being big headed about it, but here are some of the key things I've achieved, ideally with some kind of tangible evidence to back it up. Something like that. If you train yourself to be able to answer that kind of question with something that's kind of intriguing but gives that credibility, I think would be a really good actionable takeaway for people from our conversation.
I think very much so. You'd have to know your audience, but well, you don't have to intimately know them, but know who you're pitching to. But ultimately, people love stories. The corporate storytelling is such a skill. I walk into an organization and I always kind of start by saying, do you know much about Integrity HSE? Do you know much about me? And generally I'll get a bit of a blank stare, and I know we don't know that much at all. And it's no more than 2 minutes where I talk about the junior sports teams that we sponsor. I talk about the companies that we work with, but ultimately I talk about our purpose and the fact that we're not financially driven. We're here to make the working world a safer, healthier, more sustainable place. And genuinely, and here's how I can prove that's why we do that. Because of the sponsorship, because of this, because of that, we don't all drive around in Ferraris. In fact, none of us drive around in Ferraris, because we give away an awful lot of our profits to be positive influence in the world. And as soon as my audience understands that and understands my purpose and vision and mission, then my vibe tends to attract my tribe. And you'll tend to find in the room you'll immediately win a couple of people over straight away, which is great.
Yeah. Just looking to see if I can see it on my shelf. I've got a book, which is, I can't see it immediately, but it's called 7 Stories Every Salesperson Must Tell. So it comes from a sales angle. but it's exactly that. It's that piece around the kind of corporate storytelling. So there's the founding of the business story, there's the vision of the business story, there's the technical expert story, there's the personal story about and all of these things. Not all of those 7 stories are going to be relevant to a HC professional, but try to think about how you can frame your why a bit better and sort of give yourself that credence without, again, sounding too big-headed is a really, really powerful thing to do. Because that's going back to what we started speaking about. If you can do
Mhm.
that, you're going to get a much better hearing as a leader.
Totally. I always try and think about what is this person out of what I'm going to talk about, what's this person going to talk to their husband or wife about on the dinner table this evening? Do I even earn the opportunity to be at that dinner table when the partner turns around and says, how was your day at work today?
Yeah,
So, and essentially what they're saying is, tell me the 1 or 2 highlights and the 1 or 2 lowlights and what happened in your day. How do I get to be one of those 1 or 2 highlights? And we often talk about, again, it's an old cliche, but people don't really care about what you say. They really care about the way you make them feel, though.
yeah,
So how can we resonate with that person so that they get it? And also, being productive enough. We're bringing our first AI product to market quite soon, and
nice.
we were doing a pitch to a potential client a couple of days ago, and it went particularly well. And it looks like we've got another client on board, which is super. But we were talking about doing a pitch deck, and we turned around and said, "Well, look, they want the story and they want the value proposition. After that, they just want to play with the really cool tech.
Yeah,
They don't want loads of PowerPoint. They just want to be able to say, does it do this and does it do this? And they want a couple of oh my God moments of, does it do this? Yes. Oh my God. So let's stop with the PowerPoints and the this and that and just give them some oh my gods. And if you can do that whilst you're pitching as an HSE professional, then brilliant. Well played.
yeah, yeah. I remember, I won't say her name, but a lady that you may know, I know a little bit. She posted on LinkedIn about how she was struggling to articulate the value of what she was doing. And she worked in a really high profile location as head of
Mhm.
safety. She was quite senior. She's moved on from there subsequently. And I said, well, why don't you think about something like, every day I help however many hundreds of thousands of people to do X, Y, and Z and get home safely to their families, rather than I'm a health and safety professional and I've worked for 20 years doing this and I've got this qualification. Just reframing it, making it more personable and understandable and
Yeah.
memorable. Really good
I
skill to
tell-
have.
Oh, it's a wonderful skill. I tell you, something that we probably should bring up though, as we're talking about the power of storytelling and the power of basically fostering champions onto your team, is the fact that sometimes that's mistaken with competence. And especially when we're talking about social media platforms like LinkedIn, there is a fashion where those who shout loudest must be the most
Yeah,
competent. And there's an awful lot of misinformation and an awful lot of disinformation out there, but there's not an awful lot of verification of who I'm actually speaking to and the information that I'm taking on board. And I've seen this actually in Aberdeen, funnily enough, where people have been employed, taken on as a contractor to deliver a service, and they've got through supply chain onto an approved vendors list with no competence checks whatsoever, but
mm,
they've turned up and said, I can do this thing. And the thing that they are preaching that they can do is very, very important in terms of it could have tragic outcomes at the other end of it. So the corporate storytelling in terms of ourselves to get it out there, absolutely yes, 100%. And I think it was Einstein that said it's the mark of an intelligent mind to kind of listen to other ideas but not necessarily adopt them. So I would caveat this to anyone that's listening to say, you know what, enjoy the corporate storytelling. And you know what, if I'm doing it, immerse yourself in it. It's great fun and everything, but also challenge me and make sure what I'm saying, I'm actually competent to say it,
yeah.
because opinion does not make fact.
No, no, very, very true. And again, that goes back to what you said at the start about the conscious or unconscious lack of competence, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Lots of organisations, lots of people, for whatever reason, will put themselves forward as being, the world's leading expert on X, Y, Z without actually the ability of following through on that. And it's not necessarily that easy to see through it.
Not at all. We've got a chap that works for us called Rob Diver, who is he's not only an incredibly close colleague, but unfortunately, so in terms of leadership and leading this organization, I always try to lead in a friendly manner, but I do not want to lead friends, because leading friends is very, very difficult, and it's increasingly difficult in this organization because we have I'm surrounded by people who are just lovely. And Rob is one of those people that I would now class as a friend, which makes my job as a leader even more difficult. But Rob is he has a long career in law enforcement and military, and now he is a subject matter expert that's called upon by NATO in their joint warfare center, and he is just an incredible security professional. Very, very humble, very humble. Won't talk about all that much about what he does and how he does it and things like that. And subsequently, in my opinion, kind of robs the world a little bit of Rob, of all this incredibleness that he can bring to the world. But I guess that's my job to kind of tell the world about it. But he goes along to conferences with other people that claim to be security professionals as well. And you're looking at Ronaldo in a Sunday league team. And I just wish that when people were, and these other people are very successful in their security careers, and I just wish that the public would, or our potential client base, would just do that little bit more checking of the person that they, and not rely on that LinkedIn CV so much.
Yeah. How would you suggest people sort of try to overcome that then? I've got some ideas on that, but what would you sort of say?
Well, the verification
In,
of
if you're in Rob's position, what should you do to try to make it easier, or try to demonstrate that authority?
Well, I think thought leadership is really critical. But I think also being brutally honest. So being British, we are pre-programmed. It's baked into our DNA to be humble.
Yeah.
And I remember, gosh, when was it? It must have been about 5 years ago. I had somebody working for me when I was working for, well, you can all find out my career history on LinkedIn, so it's all good mentioning companies. Somebody working for me when I was working for Lloyd's Register. And I loved working for Lloyd's Register. My family has a huge maritime pedigree. So I went from Total Energies to Lloyd's Register, and I was exceptionally proud. And it was brilliant. And one of the things that you have is you inherit a team. Unless you have the wonderful opportunity that I had to build a business and that you had, then you're often parachuted in and you inherit a team. Yeah. And you inherit all the beauty of the last person and all the things you don't necessarily agree with of the last person. And I had an exceptional high performer on that team who just wouldn't shout about what they were doing whatsoever, either on the internal intranet or externally when I was talking to them about professional branding. And I remember them sitting down with me in one of those train booths that we had in the office where you had your one-on-one conversations. And they said to me, I don't need to shout about it, Steve, because if I do good work, people will recognize that. No, they won't. They won't recognize it. If you do good work, you should be telling people about the good work you do. You need to swallow that humble piece of my professional credence will organically grow. No, it won't. It might have done in the 80s, 90s, and noughties, but with the advent of people being in charge of their own personal branding, unless you're telling people what you do, then your professional credence won't grow. Now, when I say telling people what you do, I'm not saying hit them in the face with a brick. There are ways to communicate, and there are ways to. Nobody likes anyone that's arrogant. I know it's one of my massive turnoffs with people, but I do like somebody that genuinely tells me what they've done, what they're really proud of, and they can even caveat that with what their if you wanted to do a personal SWOT, what their weaknesses and what their threats are, but how they're countering them with opportunities. But, start that off by telling me what you've done, because it goes back to that credibility bank thing again. I'm really time poor. So when I speak to someone, the likes of yourself, when I speak to you, I know that this is a really high use of my time, because Christian Harris is Christian Harris, a lot of respect, love what you do and all the rest of it. But you need to tell me, if I don't know you, why I should be listening to you. And it goes back to that little pitch you were talking about earlier. So important.
Yeah. I'm with you. So, I mean, not that everybody needs to write a book, but obviously I've written a book, right? And one of the reasons I wrote the book was, if you look at the word authority, it's author, itty, isn't it? I think writing and thought leadership, as you said, is really, really important. It doesn't have to be written. You could do videos, you can do podcasts nowadays, but I think getting your thoughts, your experiences, your successes, the hurdles you've overcome down onto a piece of paper, or at least something that someone else can listen to, read, watch, whatever it is really the best way of achieving that, and just getting that stuff in the right place. Because, as you say, nowadays attention is the most valuable currency, and people aren't necessarily going to be looking for stuff. And if they are looking for stuff, they're looking for stuff that's easily accessible. So you've got to invest a bit in yourself to document this stuff and put it out there in the right kind of places.
I thought it was fascinating, so I've read your book and I think it's wonderful. I think it's brilliant. I think it's very much the vehicle that you use for messaging is so important. So I stuck together a book as well and got it out there. Yeah. And one of the most, and it wasn't nearly as refined and elegant as yours, but one of the most interesting things that I found with that was that I was downloading as much of my experience and everything that I could into the book. And I found that there were certain pockets that I told the stories to and that I told the lessons to, and they paid no attention whatsoever. But when they read it on a page, if it's in a book, then it has to be right. Now, I completed my manuscript, sent it away to a third-party editor who corrected all my grammar and silly spelling mistakes. And then I self-published on Amazon. So I had no checks or balances. I could put anything at all in that book. But as soon as something goes in a book, it is hugely believable. So again, it's that thing about certainly the vehicle for messaging. A book is incredibly powerful. And there's different levels of power and different things to reach different demographics. But again, it's about going back to that LinkedIn profile, going through and say, did you actually do that? Tell me about when you did that. And then tell me backwards, just so I know that you know, and then I'll read your book and say it's amazing, which your book is amazing. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. I think the thing with the book is just the sheer volume of it, I suppose. So obviously, you could publish a book that was just full of nonsense and just padded out and whatever, and maybe people wouldn't realize. But if anybody actually reads the book in any way, even if they're just sort of skimming through it, they can sort of see whether it's coherent and makes sense or not. And I suppose I personally found it really valuable, the actual act of writing the book, to sort of get all my thinking aligned and so on. But I mean, fundamentally, if you know enough about whatever the topic is to write a book about it of a decent size, then you must know a fair bit about the topic. So it does give you a massive credibility. Not that I'm suggesting everybody should write a book, but you can write a 500-word article and achieve a similar result. It's not exactly the same, obviously, but that's sort of what we're saying, I think, is start with something like that, isn't it?
Well, yeah, definitely. And I tell you what, I'll go one step further and I'll say everyone should write a book, because the process, the cathartic process that it took me through was incredible. So I started with a couple of articles on LinkedIn, realized that, I quite enjoy writing. And the nice thing with LinkedIn is that I'd put the articles out there and think, you know what, I'm not shoving these in people's faces. If they don't like the articles, unfollow me and you don't have to see the articles. If you do like the articles, then follow me and you can see them. So anyone that comments on that professional platform and says, oh, this person, oh, it's terrible, well, just unfollow them and take control of your thread and grow up. But with the process that was happening with my articles in it, and I tended to find it was really, really good for me to put it down on paper and then even revisit what I thought was a really, really engaging, informing, comprehensive lesson and go back to it a couple of days later and realize, actually, there's so much more. There's the, you know, it's not now the IQ lesson, it's the EQ lesson that took a couple of days to come through for me to realize, actually, that's what I was doing. So I guess there's kind of two sides to the coin, isn't it? When you spin a coin, there's two sides on it. And the first one is for the reader and the benefit that you can give them, but for yourself and the retrospective analysis. And you know what, you don't, if someone's listening to this and thinking, well, that's rubbish, I wouldn't want to write a book. You don't have to write a book. You can talk a book and Microsoft will put it into print for you. But just journaling and getting that out, I think it's so valuable. It certainly was for me anyway.
Yeah. A lot of my book was basically dictated, and then obviously, tidied up a bit afterwards. But I quite liked that, and lots of people that know me well have said that when they've read the book, they said, "Oh, you can actually hear your voice in it." And I thought, that's planned. I didn't want to write like an academic tome. It was kind of designed in that way. So yeah, and there's great apps you can get nowadays, and you can leverage AI. I mean, I used AI to check. So I've uploaded my book, the PDF, into Claude.ai, and I said, right, can you analyze this and tell me in every chapter, how many case studies have I got? Which sectors do those case studies relate to, and so on and so forth. And you can just really make sure that it's thorough, and it was helped me a lot because doing that manually would have just taken me so long. So writing the book took me long enough. All that extra editing and stuff.
I think the advent of AI is it's really game changing. I was speaking to my father just a couple of weeks ago, and I introduced him to AI. And my son rises and sets with my father. He's very fortunate with him. But my father doesn't have an academic background. He's a Liverpudlian that jumped on a ship when he was 16. And they weren't going to give him a job on the ship. And then one of the management in the line said, if you can learn shorthand, then you can get on the ship. And as much as education hasn't engaged him, he's still got the shortest record in Liverpool for learning shorthand, which is brilliant. So lots and lots of intelligence, just the education system just wasn't there. So subsequently, he's a little bit nervy, understandably so, about grammar and things like that. So I was at his house a couple of weeks ago, and I clicked up ChatGPT and wrote down in ChatGPT, hi, my name's Dad's name, and I'm writing this to his friend, put the name in, who lives down in Cornwall. I'd dearly love to come down and visit you. I have great memories of us sitting in our cabin together, drinking rum and laughing about the stories online. I've got a window in a month's time, and I'd really like to know when you've got a couple of spare days. And I said, write it in relatively formal British English in an engaging narrative in 200 words. And it pumped out this email. Dad subsequently spent 2 or 3 days just writing emails to people that he'd never, ever, usually talked to, that he really, really wanted to. And I think it's a really great lesson, and that AI is there to facilitate our living, to raise our standard of living. And it really can. People that are afraid of AI, you should always be frosty. You should always be, challenging when it's appropriate. But this is something that's going to come as a tidal wave, and you can either surf it or you can drown. It's always better surfing on the crest, isn't it?
Yeah. That's exactly the analogy I use when I speak about it. You want to be riding that wave, not standing on the beach when the tsunami comes and crashes in.
Exactly.
And it's an interesting time actually with AI now, because we're kind of at the point where we're sort of 2 years in almost to ChatGPT. And if you look at a lot of historic technological trends, that first couple of years is kind of adoption, but it's kind of slower adoption, and then all of a sudden it starts to really go. And I wonder whether, if we were sitting here in April 2027, 2 years from now, how far it would have accelerated in the last 2 years. I think it's going to be, it's going to be very, very interesting.
Oh, absolutely. The data analysis potential of it is absolutely massive. So one of the things that we're doing at the company is we're opening, we're going to be opening a health center here, and that's going to be for offshore medicals and seafaring medicals and vaccinations. And one of the things we're going to be doing is blood testing as well. And the analysis of blood work when you employ something like AI is just game changing. It's amazing. Taking anything from 150 to 1,000 criteria and then building up the probabilities on something like a Bayesian probability belief network, where you can say, the 971st criteria is at 17%. When that's mixed with the 11th criteria that is at 23%, then we know the outcome could potentially be this. Things that as humans, we just can't do. And AI can, in terms of healthcare, in terms of not sickness management, but in terms of preventative healthcare.
Preventative, yeah.
Oh, it's, they say these days that cancer is coming for 1 in 2 of us. It's only going to be a couple of years before it's 3 and 4, and then a couple of years before it's 4 and 5. AI will give us the ability to not just predict it earlier, pre-symptomatic, or what we understand right now as being a symptom, but it'll be able to steer us, and it's incredibly exciting. It really is.
Yeah. Tony Blair's speaking a lot about that, isn't he? Preventative NHS, moving to that preventative model, which I think Wes Streeting's picking on board. And that's what I bang on about all the time in my field of safety. We've got to be preventative and stop these things from happening if we can, and use the science, use the data, leverage the technology. So it's definitely the way to go.
Yeah, but like you say, leveraging the technology and using that. But if you were to take that kind of analogy that I gave of the blood work and said, I've got AI that's using 1,000 criteria in order to create a threat landscape for you in terms of health. Okay, wonderful. And then you put that down to an organization, and you have AI monitoring 1,000 inputs and outputs of your organization, everything from the weather and the way the wind's blowing to the time of day to the everything, and you could potentially have a live alert demonstration as things go on, with predictive analysis of where your risk's going to go, when it's going to go. And then, Julie, who's the operations manager in Factory C, has just resigned, and she's working her 3-month notice. Okay, well, the AI's actually just thought, well, in 3 months' time, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And then, we can see so much that as humans, we have amazing abilities to love and feel and be incredible. But cognitively, we're ants. We need help. And that's what AI can bring.
Yeah, definitely. Well, really enjoyed that conversation. We went down some really interesting paths there. So thank you for sharing your views. Where can people learn a bit more? Where can people connect? And have you got anything you'd like to plug?
I've lots of things I'd like to plug, and so you can learn a little bit more about me on LinkedIn. You can find me on there. I am very fortunate to run a company called Integrity HSE, along with my business partner Darryl Lyons, and just an incredible group of people. One of which I can hear through the office, called Jennifer Hall, who has just incredible in terms of business development. She's really acted as a catalyst for this organization, and we're helping more and more people to make their working world a safer, healthier, more sustainable place. I would point people towards my book as well, so you can buy it on Amazon, The Little Book of Leadership. All profits go to a cancer-related charity, which is very close to my heart. So you'll notice a consistent theme in some of the things I talk about. So So yeah, please have a look at that. But I guess my last thing that I'd like to say is read my book, but don't adopt my ideas. Just listen to my ideas. Make your own judgments. It's my book is just 45,000 odd words of just my history and what I've learned in the world. But everyone's perspective is different, so own your own.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, definitely. Great. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed
Brilliant.
it. And thanks for joining Stephen and I today, and we'll see you next week on the next episode.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.